Here we are, one more time discussing Star Trek Prodigy Season 1. We're up to Episode 19, the first part of the season finale entitled Supernova, Part 1. If you are new to these parts, you may need to be warned right now. We will be getting into spoilers. If that's not your thing, please back out and come back after you've seen the episode. If not, you've been warned, and now we're cracking on. As I mentioned, this is the penultimate episode, the first half to the final episode of this season. This absolutely felt like a season-ending cliffhanger, so I don't know what they're going to do next episode. Are they actually going to resolve things, or are they going to even further dig their way into another cliffhanger and leave us hanging for the long haul? I don't know the state of the show going forward. I heard rumors that it's not coming back to Nickelodeon, so I don't know if that means it's going to be a Paramount exclusive, if it's going to evolve into something else. There's all sorts of questions, but boy oh boy do I need to say this right off the bat. This episode really blew it out of the park. I know I've been having a few issues with the most recent episodes, kind of dragging their feet. This episode really made it feel like by dragging their feet, they really did want to set something up. So I can't fault them too much because they were really leading into something fantastic here. Out of all of the Star Trek we've had in a long time, if you take this episode in isolation, this definitely feels like we are in the Star Trek universe. Now, there's been concepts and strategies and things in other episodes that have felt Star Trek. Their themes have felt like it. Their stories have felt like it. But just the iconography here, the starships, the characters, the uniforms, everything here felt like we were actually inside the world of TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, that whole era. And that really takes me back. And that's what the show is doing such a great thing about. It really culminated all of the storylines. And I've been viewing this season basically as the second season, because although it is season 1, we had that huge break in the middle, and the storylines are not necessarily dissimilar from each other, but they are very different in terms of their goals and in terms of what's actually happening, even though it's an evolution of the original storyline. So I definitely feel like the first half of this season was season 1, whereas what we're watching now, all these chase sequences and the Protostar trying to get away from Starfleet while also getting in touch with Starfleet, that definitely feels like a change in course. So I definitely think that it's more of a season 2 type of thing. So what were the downsides of this episode? Because there were a couple, and they're similar to downsides I've had in previous episodes of this show, and that's purely, I believe, due to the fact that this show is intended for a younger audience and squeezed into a shorter runtime. That's by no means degrading the show's quality, writing, integrity, any of that. It just feels like they don't have time necessarily to build things out the way a typical Star Trek show would. So resolutions, solutions, people coming up with the answer or understanding what's going on tends to come a bit more quickly and a little less earned than I feel like a typical Star Trek show would have. Basically, when a problem is presented, a solution is come up with relatively quickly and on the first or second try, instead of, 15 minutes of trial and error and a couple people putting their heads together. Not so much of that magic meeting room type thing where you all sit around a conference table, debate solutions. It's more a question of our characters standing around in a hallway, bouncing a couple solutions off each other, and then just kind of immediately getting it and going with it. It definitely feels earned, like our characters are actually evolving, learning, growing, and coming up with these things, and I do enjoy that. But at the same time, there were a couple moments, one in particular, that didn't ring true to me. So we have our two characters, our two ships, finally talking to each other. So the whole crux of this episode is, after all of our characters' efforts, well, Starfleet finally makes contact with the Protostar because the Dauntless is under the command, this woman in my background, actually, the one who was pretending to be Atensia, or however you pronounce that, the Trill officer on the Dauntless. She is now technically taken control of the Dauntless because after the shenanigans of last episode, Janeway had been thrown in the brig. We find out some interesting things about some characters in this episode, but ostensibly right now, everything has gone to hell. The entire plan of our characters has fallen out the wayside, and Starfleet has made contact with the Protostar, all the ships within range, instantly become infected with this horrible weapon, and they basically take control of themselves. The program lowers their shields and has the ships kind of start firing on each other. One thing I did find interesting here is the Matrix thing was showing different ships and kind of cycling through them. So was it really only able to take control of one ship at a time while it was kind of infiltrating the rest of them and keeping their shields down and keeping their weapons down and all that stuff? Was it really only capable of controlling one ship at a time, or was that just a nice visual reference of how they were kind of cycling through this battle? Possibly the best assemblage of Starfleet vessels we've seen in a long time. Sure, there's been a few instances of this in some of the live-action shows, but even in those cases, they're kind of a wide shot, a far away type of thing. This is the first time we've really seen a lot of close-up shots, sweeping imagery, battles, different versions of the ships, and I understand this is more easily done in a completely computer-generated environment because you're not spending nearly as much time creating and implementing the models as you would in a live-action show, but it just felt great. We got to see some classics, we got to see Sovereign classes, we got to see Akira, we got to see a Defiant class or two. Not entirely sure if it was the Defiant. Well, actually, it couldn't be the original Defiant at this point. It would have to be, what was it, the Sao Paulo that was rechristened the Defiant. And there was a bunch of other ships in there too, some Excelsiors possibly I may have seen in the background. Coming back to the point that really felt untrue, disingenuous, however you want to refer to that, is the scene when Dal was talking to Admiral Janeway on the view screen. So after everything had gone to hell, they strike up a communication, and Dal comes to the conclusion, this realization that, oh no, this is infecting all of the Starfleet vessels. And he's like, you know what? What if we were to contact some allies in the area who weren't using Starfleet technology in their vessels? And Admiral Janeway says, well, I don't really see what good that would do. I mean, you don't want to bring more ships in here to... Wait a minute. If these ships don't have Starfleet technology, then they might just be... I mean, that didn't ring to me as true. Janeway really didn't put that together that quickly. She took a moment to process that in her brain. I don't know, that just felt a little off to me, and a little unlike Janeway of old. I think they were just trying to play up our character Dal as coming up with the right solution so that later on it could be shown that, you know what, maybe he saved the day and we need to rethink our whole stance on augmented people, something along those lines. Clearly, it made sense. He's basically the main character of the show, so I have to admit that they really should give him situations like this. And then that was a great moment when he and Gwyn kind of didn't see eye to eye and he thought she was making a move on him, kissed her. Not really interested in these interpersonal relationships and a love story or anything, but it definitely had been building towards that a little bit, so it's nice to see it actually come to a head. Then we get the whole playoff of the Dreadnought basically taking out all of our crew, and the whole Gwyn situation with her father. He eventually tries to protect her, and in doing so, and is killed. At least that's how it appears. I'm not entirely sure what happened here. It looked like he turned into some sort of energy. Originally, I thought this was something along the lines of him being reintegrated into the time stream because he was a man out of time, but I don't think that's the case because it looked like he turned into energy and was absorbed, so maybe that's just some sort of unique biology they share. Interested to see if he's not dead, but he's still playing a role as a voice in her head, or they're kind of combining intellect. I don't know what's going on there. But they also play with the whole notion when all the universal translators go out and nobody can really talk with each other, except, of course, characters who may already speak the same language, and Gwyn, because she had been taught by her father all sorts of different languages to help subjugate all these races and species they had captured, so she's able to act as a translator. This worked well. Obviously, it played up her character. It gave her something to do. It gave her a moment to be the hero, to step in and be the captain of the ship and do all of these fantastic moments to save Starfleet and the Federation. Not really sure why hologram Janeway was unable to translate. She, in my opinion, shouldn't be affected by a breakdown of the Universal Translator because I have to imagine that her holo program, her Matrix, has a Universal Translator built into it, and especially after the fact that Admiral Janeway purged her program last episode, I would think she would be working in her full capacity and still have access to that. I know it's just a minor nitpick here, and narratively it worked better that she didn't, but it's just something that doesn't ring true to me as being a fault in her technology. Then we have the true climax of the story. They're able to call in allies. We get to see Klingons. We get to see a couple Ferengi ships. We get to see, I believe they said, some Vulcan civilian vessels. And it turns out that they're able to turn the tide of this situation, but not for long. Starfleet ships have this built-in code where when they're in danger, they call out for assistance of other Starfleet vessels, and a new force of Starfleet vessels is continually coming in to render assistance. As soon as they warp into the area, they're also infected, and they start joining the fray of destroying all of the other ships. We actually get to see some Starfleet vessels and some Klingon vessels completely destroyed. I don't know if they're going to reverse this in some way, so now I guess it's a good time to talk about my thoughts on what may come next. They're in a desperate situation. Their plan didn't really work. Now they've dragged in all these other kind of sort of related but not actually in the Federation species to help them, to help out other Alpha Quadrant species. So I'm wondering two different things here. When they put out this distress call for other non-aligned people to come in, are we going to see the return of Okana, and is he actually going to get some sort of heroic retribution for leaving them in the lurch a few episodes ago? I'm really still reeling from the fact that he was kind of misused. He came in, had a fun episode, and then dipped out, and I don't feel like we had any sort of resolution with him, so I do hope he comes back, and this might be a good way to do it. Coming in with a cavalry to kind of save the day. Remember, there's this whole subplot going on of time travel. The bad guys here are coming from the future to prevent something that is yet to happen. So could this be putting two things together here? They're drawing quite a bit from Voyager. Could they be bringing in either the time ship Relativity or the Temporal Investigations Unit, something along those lines? Will they come in to save the day and correct the timeline? Alternatively, could we see possibly Daniels, the temporal Cold War agent that we saw in Enterprise, show up to kind of fix things? I'm thinking, if anything, we may get an appearance by Wells from the Relativity, who played Duquesne in last season of Picard, because a lot of people were assuming he was reprising his role as Agent Wells, but that wasn't the case. He's already associated with current Star Trek. Maybe he lends a voice here. Or could we see Chakotay return from the future? Maybe he cobbled together some sort of force in the future and has figured out a way to travel back in time, and he shows up to save the day. If that's the case, are we going to reset things so that none of these ships were destroyed? Also, I'm wondering, and I really doubt this, based on things Terry Metalis has said about Season 3 of Picard, the Enterprise E will not be in it, but it will be mentioned. Could the Enterprise E have been destroyed during this battle, and that's the reason we're not seeing the Enterprise E anymore? It might be cool, but I think that for such a heroic hero ship, I don't know if they would just kind of blast it away in such an ancillary type of way. While Janeway is in the brig, the crewman she is talking to, who is guarding her, happens to be a grown-up version of a child she rescued back in the Voyager episode Counterpoint, where they were kind of taking these telepathic or latently telepathic people with slightly heightened abilities, ESP, all that stuff, hiding them in their transporters, smuggling them across space, and depositing them through a wormhole to safety. She has now joined Starfleet and remembers Janeway and knows to trust her because of those moments when she was a kid in the Delta Quadrant. So it seems like the Delta Quadrant has really integrated quite a bit more into the Alpha Quadrant, into Starfleet, into the Federation since Voyager has ended, and I really want a lot more information regarding that. We don't have a final resolution. I'm very intrigued to see where we go from here. What are you thinking about Prodigy? What do you think is going to happen in the finale next time? And where do you want this show to go in the future? Leave all your thoughts below, hit the like, leave a subscribe, do a comment, hit the join. I don't think that's even a thing you can do. I'm just saying all the things. But until next time, computer and program.